Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our very first event, Fireside Chat between Alpesh, my partner, and me, the very critical topic of Essential 8. It's very timely that we've chosen this topic because this is the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. But before we get started on the conversation and what Essential 8 is about and how Educate can help you, I thought it's important that we have a little bit of introduction about who we are and how Educate sort of came into being. It would be inappropriate for me to be the one to talk about Educate because this was my partner Alpesh's dream, and I'll let him start with the introductions. So over to you, Alpesh.
Thank you, Daanish. And hello, everyone. Welcome to our first fireside chat of the many that's going to come through from our team here at Educate. Uh, I'm Alpesh Nakar, based in Brisbane. I have been in Australia for over 2 decades, and I'm super happy that I'm able to kickstart Educate with Daanish in this space where we do want to make a difference, teaching what's going to help everyone to deliver in projects and keeping things secure, whether it's for the organizations or for themselves. Um, and this is not my first rodeo in the training side of things. Before I migrated to Australia, we did have one of our trainers where we did training and consulting hand in hand. Back then, it wasn't called workforce integrated learning, but essentially it was like, we should train and then, like, get some work experience. For the lack of better word, at that point in time, I think it was basically called apprenticeship, right? So it was good. Certainly, we are looking forward to sharing a lot more about Educate as we grow and we share that through various social media channels. But in this instance, we definitely want to touch upon certain things around Essential 8, as Danish mentioned in the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. But before we do that, I do want to share this that, like, Danish and I haven't just kind of come together in recent months to kickstart this. We go a long way. In fact, close to 25, 27 years, we have known each other. And we came about being when Danish just moved recently to Melbourne in Australia. But before I do that, I do want Danish to introduce himself and talk a little bit about what we did back then. All good stuff. There's no doubt about it. But I'll hand over to Danish to introduce himself. Thank you,
Yeah,
Danish.
yeah, thank you, Alpesh. Yes, so like Alpesh mentioned, he and I go way back. We actually just worked together for 6 months, but I think it was the start of a lifelong friendship. We did sort of not part ways, but we lost touch as it happens since I moved to the UK initially, then back to India, then moved to Singapore. But like Alpesh mentioned, I've just recently, less than 3 months ago, relocated from Singapore to Melbourne after spending 10 years in Singapore. And I also decided beginning of this calendar year that I was done, in a corporate job, selling for others, and decided to sort of go on my own. And that is how, this partnership with Alpesh came about. So through this conversation, maybe towards the end, we will share some of the other ventures that we're working on and how that ties into Educate. But without further ado, we would like to get started with the topic of the day, which is Essential 8, and why is it critical and who is it important for. So while we do that, please keep the questions coming in to our Q&A chat, and our experts will try to answer as soon as they can. So yes, so let's get started on this one. So Alpesh, let's dive right in. As you know, I'm quite new to Australia, but since I've been here, I do hear a lot about this Essential 8. And tell me what the fuss is all about. What exactly is Essential 8?
Sure, Danish. Yes, so it's essentially Essential 8, right, is basically a set of mitigation strategies, guidelines that's from the Australian Signals Directorate. That's that is again for the repeating this, right? Like essentially it is for organizations and individual in terms of, okay, these are the things they should be actually looking at or doing. Like, it's, I wouldn't call it exactly a toolkit, but you can basically say, like, these are the frameworks or patterns with which organizations and individuals can follow through. Now, primarily this is for organizations, no doubt about it. But there's no doubt that, like, even individuals can adopt. And in fact, as we move along in the segment, we'll see things that apply at individual level. We have already been doing some of that stuff unknown to us, right? So it's better to be conscious and adopt these essential eight um, across the board.
That's an interesting take, Alpesh, that this applies to individuals as well, because from what I understood, this was only for organizations. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into that a little later. But tell me,
Yes,
what are these eight essentials basically, and why eight? Why not seven or nine? So,
yes, sure. So when you look at it, right, like, so the essential eight is it's a mixed bag again, like, as we call as a toolkit, like of few things in terms of the IT systems and the application, right? So when we look at it, it's like the application control, patching applications, configuring Microsoft Office macro settings, user application hardening, restricting administrative privileges, patching operating systems, multi-factor authentication, and regular backups, right? So these make up the essential eight. And, like, you're right, there could be seven or 10, but, like, these are something that with eight you get started. And as we go along, we'll see they almost touch upon all the baseline part of any system, right? Whether, again, like I said, it'll probably make more sense when we look from even the individual perspective. So per se, ACAC doesn't say, oh, these essential eight are only for the organizations there. Like, we can adopt that framework and pattern to apply that in our personal lives as well. Like, a classic example that we'll see will be around the multi-factor authentication. I'm not sure how much TV you have time to watch, but, like, the government has been running ads around enabling multi-factor authentication and what could be the implications of not going ahead with it. But we'll cover that very specifically when we talk about multi-factor authentication.
yeah, that's a classic one, right? Like multi-factor authentication is really everywhere. A lot of organizations, a lot of even consumer, apps are going away from just password to having a second factor of authentication. So let's discuss that a little bit in detail later. Tell me, let's start with application control, Alpesh, and can you tell me what that is all about?
Sure, Danish, absolutely. So application control is all about preventing unauthorized programs from running on your system, right? Is very critical, especially in organizations, for them to be able to prevent, like, with the remote work, not being actually on the office network. So the controls need to be further extended from that aspect, right? So the IT teams and security teams would work with application owners to ensure that, like, what applications are needed and can be run, right? So it has to be trusted. Now, if you take an example completely out of the IT space, like, if you're living in a massive tower of, like, say 15 or 20 floors, um, and you're living on an X floor, you would only have access to X floor and the common areas, and you wouldn't be able to swipe your card to go to other floors, right? So that's unauthorized access. And similarly, unauthorized applications cannot be allowed to run on the systems, and that's what your application control is all about.
Right. So that means that I shouldn't be sideloading applications from unauthorized or unapproved app stores, especially on my Android devices.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, it is important to download apps only from, whether it is on your mobile devices or even for your devices like laptops or workstations at home. It has to be from reliable source, like, so again, thankfully for Apple, iOS and Google/Android. If you're downloading from the Play Store or the App Store, then you're covered. But if people have done what they shouldn't be doing on their phones, for example, gone outside of the boundaries, and then they start downloading, I think they're putting themselves at risk, right? Like, even with those apps. And similarly, like, on home devices, whether it's Windows or Mac, um, it's not advisable to try and click on something and download just because you want to try it. Probably sandbox it. If you are the kind of guy who can understand what sandboxing is and do it, um, then yeah, definitely air gap it and do it so you don't risk everything else.
Right. So some of these are very technical terms, maybe for some of our audience as well. But so let's talk about the next one, right? Patch applications. Like, is that just about making sure you have the latest version of every app, or what exactly does that entail?
Yes. Yes. So patching applications, and I think, we'll take two aspects to this. You're middle of something, and suddenly you get a pop-up saying, "Hey, your PC needs to restart." Like, at work, and you do get annoyed. Like, no, I'm in the middle of something. I've got these million tabs open, and I'm guilty of it. So don't no one should take this personally, right? You have applications open. You're busy working, and suddenly you say, "Oh, this PC is going to start in X amount of time to do something," right? And it's like, why do IT guys have to push out these things? But take a pause and understand it is to patch an application. It could be a security patch, or it could be a feature enhancement, or whatever it may be. Whilst many cases the organizations or the app owners, right, give out few bits and pieces. Even if it's a security vulnerability that they're patching, they're not going to openly say, "Hey, no, we are patching this." Not to scare you or anything, but it is more around for others not to know, like, the bad actors to know this is what they're patching. Not necessarily they would know this, but it is about making sure your application is up to date, whether it's bug fixes, security fixes. That's what it comes down to, right? And we have seen, we're all using mobile devices. I'm pretty sure you don't leave your app store icon saying, "Oh, these are the four apps that need to be updated for a long period of time." Like, if anything, I would probably say update as soon as possible. Have it on auto update on your mobile devices, and also on your home devices, because that is something which you can control, and let those patches run as soon as they are released. Now, I know there's general consensus that, like, you should probably wait for bits and pieces, like, for a period of time before running these patch updates. It's debatable. Personally, I wait for even an iOS update to come through, and I don't like, wait for the 8.1, iOS 8.1, or whatever the next iteration is. I just make sure I update immediately, like, because it does go through rigorous testing anyways with the vendors. And if it's going to fail, it's going to fail, whether it's first iteration or second one. Debatable. I know we could catch a flag on that one, but that's my personal preference. I don't wait for a long before hitting the update on whether it's the apps or whatever it is.
Well, talking about catching a flag, we all know about the recent incident with Microsoft and CrowdStrike, but I think that's an exception to the rule. But if I'm being really honest, I am guilty of hitting that remind me later button up until the point that the IT team really forces it onto me. So I guess I should stop
Yes.
doing that and you know really let it update as soon as it is feasible for us. And I think that's a lesson for everyone, I suppose.
Absolutely. And look, security is not only about just security. It has to be a mix of convenience and security, right? Like, so your productivity should not get impacted. So you're spot on, Danish. I think if you find that balance between, like, okay, you've seen this pop up, probably set some time frames around, like, maybe I'll finish this in a day or two. I will make sure I've saved everything and then hit the update, right? Like, but like, not prolong it to a point where, like, yeah, IT then just comes down hard, because they do set that, like, after X amount of snooze, for the lack of better word, they will basically force it, which means you'll end up potentially losing something if you haven't saved it or whatever it is.
That's duly noted, Alpesh. So let's talk about this next topic of Microsoft Office macros. I see those warnings pop up, and I've seen those for decades. And I usually just say enable, to move on with life and get work done. Uh, Am I missing something here?
Good point, right? So maybe next time when you actually come across that, try saying I don't accept it or disable or whatever, and see what happens, right? Because in many instances, there may be ways where things can be automated or made faster or simpler. And some techies may have written macro. Macro is basically uh, a specific way of getting things done, right? So it's kind of writing some code, right? And I'll give a classic example, right? Like, and I think you and everyone else should give this a go because I've tried this when I came across with AI. You can actually now go into Chat GPT or something and like write a prompt saying write me a WBA code for PowerPoint on these topics with X number of slides. And trust me, when I read this and I tried this, I was like, wow. So basically, what happens was Chat GPT actually created that code, which then in Microsoft Office, like in PowerPoint, I went and I said, okay, um, run this macro. And it did, and it created those 10 slides automatically. Now, this is a good part of it, right? But now just imagine the file that you may have got from someone has macros in it. And just to make it easier, you hit, yep, accept, right? Now, wherever you got that file from, whilst we don't distrust that person, but they may have got it from somebody else or whatever it is, they did the same thing except the macro. And if this is malicious, whilst not only they are potentially impacted, you could get impacted as well, right? So I think it is probably safer to not accept the macro and see what happens. And if application doesn't run, then open a macro, ask your friends, hey, does this look okay, all right? Again, depends on time and balance. So again, as always, I'll keep saying this. Security is about managing things without compromising on productivity or the safety, right? So it has to be a good balance in security. I
I
hope
think
that your inquisitiveness about macro, right, which is very specific to Microsoft Office products.
yes. No, I'll definitely be more careful with those now, and hopefully our audience will be as well.
Yep.
So let's move on to this next topic, which to me sounds a lot more technical than some of the other stuff that we've discussed, is about
Yep.
user application hardening. So how is this different from application patching or some of the other stuff that we've discussed about applications before?
Excellent. Great question, right? So when we talk about the application patching or the application control, that is the key difference over there is like either you run it or you don't run it, right? Everyone's got browsers, so I'll take an example of a browser, right? Um, Whatever your browser of choice is, right? When you get onto certain websites, they will ask you, do you allow this browser to track your location, right? For 1 day or forever or whatever it is, right? Whatever may be the prompt. Um, and you can choose to say never or allow for 1 day. Essentially, what it means is you are basically allowing that application, which is a user-based application, a browser, to let the website track your location, which then we know what happens. You start getting ads based on
Right.
your location and the things you're doing, etc., right? And browser everyone needs. So an organization cannot say, you know what, I'm not going to whitelist this application, right? They have to let everyone use a browser, but they can put controls behind the scenes for those browsers. So that's where your user application is hardened. So they'll put controls in place where, like, don't allow these things to happen or that thing to happen. Now, if you're using Microsoft Edge and you have Microsoft account associated with it, or your Microsoft Work account, right, which is not your consumer account, Outlook or whatever it is, but your work account in M365, and if you go and look in the settings, depending on what your organization allows, you might see an option to sync your bookmarks and passwords and all that stuff. Or if that is disabled, that's because your IT team has hardened your application. That is, you, the user, using that application, you'll have these controls in place to stop that from happening. Right. So that's what user application hardening is all about. I hope that uh, clarifies or makes it easier to understand the aspect of it.
No, I think it does. Before we move on to the next topic, Alpesh, what I'm realizing is that these things are not applicable just for corporates, and like you said, applicable to users. But I think my big takeaway is that this is applicable not only to Australians, right? So while this seems to be a directive by the Australian Signals Directorate, and we'll talk a little bit about ASD and ACSC and the difference between the two. This to me seems a very universal sort of a guideline and something that organizations everywhere can adopt.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, whilst we do see a lot of that as essentially from ASD and ACAC side of things, right? You're right. It is not something that is only Australian, right? Uh, it would be great for individuals and organizations to accept and adopt some of these things, right? Or all of it. And whilst they may be doing it, I think what is important is it has come under an umbrella which becomes an easier pattern slash framework to start with, right? Because essentially it is not the end of it all. It's a starting point. There's a lot of things that can be done, but this covers a wider area across all domains in terms of cybersecurity that all organizations worldwide and individuals can adopt as case may be.
Yeah, I think that is basically my takeaway from this, that this is universal.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
All right, so let's see what's next on this list. So I hear something about restricting administrative privileges, like help our audience understand what exactly that is.
Sure thing, Danish. So again, this is would be an extension of the security controls, and let's take a case of parents probably restricting physical access, let's say to a tablet, right? So that is kind of restricting in certain ways. But they could also take this to the next level by enabling certain controls. And I'm planning to do a video in coming weeks around very specifically around the privacy controls that can actually be enabled on iOS, because we are an iOS family at home. Not that we have implemented these controls, but I think it's something that we can look at. But my point being is, parents can actually put controls in place on the tablet where they can give the tablet, don't have to worry about it, or look over the shoulder of their kids to see if they're safe. But they can put controls in place, which is what we call restrict admin privileges, and kids may not be able to do certain things. Now, this resonates very well with how you would see in a corporate world where you have been given a laptop and you try to install an app, again from a legitimate location, right? And you download happily and you click exe to execute and says enter your admin password, which you are not, which means you can't uh, install the app. Not that the IT team doesn't trust you, but like, there are certain apps they probably do not want you to install. If you tie this back in with, like, patching of applications, right? So if there is a certain number of applications that have been allowed, right? So now see, this is all going to start tying in. If they are allowing certain number of apps, which is our whitelisted or approved apps, right? Then patching becomes easier because they know there are these 10 apps that our users can use, in which case becomes easier not only from patching applications but also restricting or putting boundaries around not having any other non-approved apps, right? So that you can only achieve by putting admin privileges, restricting you from doing things that you probably would do at home. But just like the way you don't want your kids to be unsafe, I think the organizations have a right on making sure the corporate data and everything associated with it is safe.
So you're saying that most users are like kids, is it? Is that the takeaway from here?
Absolutely. Look, as kids, they always learn something. I'm sure as adults, we don't stop learning stuff, right? So I kind of resonate with that. Like, we are always learning, and we're probably going to learn something as we move along. So yeah, probably it's okay to say we are all kids, right?
No, son, I was just kidding about that. But the thing, Alpesh, is we are all administrators on our home computers, right?
Yes.
So if we have to do this to be safe in the corporate world, is that a bad thing that we have admin privileges on our own personal computers?
It's about convenience again, right? About security versus convenience or productivity, right? So I know we all lacks, and at certain point in time, or probably about a decade or so back, I did have all these admin privileges on all the devices, or rather, let's put it that way: one user did everything, right? Whether I was using that as things to do, and also as admin privileges. But then, as I started learning, right, and I was part of an organization where I actually learned this stuff. Now you might call this, or people might call this super extreme, but this is the norm in the organization, right? In the IT spaces, there were admin accounts very specifically created for very specific activities to be done, right? So for example, now if you take an example today, on premises admin account would ideally be different, right? I'm not even breaking this down into separate areas or applications, but let's say your on-premises admin account would be different in an organization, and then your cloud admin account would be different. And if you probably go really crazy with this methodology, right? Cloud, let's say Microsoft 365 activities would be probably be done using a different admin account, and then Azure stuff would be done using a very different admin account, right? So like you can go as uh, secure as you want with these things, but it depends how it needs to be done, what's convenient, and what's necessary, right? So I definitely don't personally, I don't have my account that I use for day-to-day activities, whether it's in cloud or even on my devices. I don't have the same account with admin privileges. My user account is standard, and there's anything else that I need to do has an admin account associated in some shape or form to do things like no admin privileges for my standard account.
Okay, that does make sense. I mean, of course, you have to always balance between convenience and security, but I guess in a corporate world, it makes sense why most users should not have admin rights.
Yes.
So I'll before we move on to the next topic, just for our sake of our audience, we have a few more essentials to cover, but please stay back until the end of this fireside chat. We're going to also talk about how Educate can help organizations not only with providing guidance of what is wrong, but educating your teams and how we can actually help you achieve uh, all of these topics of essential aid that we've covered. So right, moving on to the next topic, Alpesh, is about patching of operating systems. Right, I think we've already covered patching of applications. I'm assuming this is more or less on the same lines.
Yes, yes. So it's this is a layer above, right? So like your applications run on an operating system. Definitely two different things. So whilst you patch your application, but if you don't patch your operating system, you still are vulnerable in some shape or form, right? So it's about uh, what you call as defense in depth, right? Like so you need to make sure everything is covered, like you're secure from every aspect potentially, right? So it does come down to operating systems, whether it is Apple or iOS or Windows or like the Android of the world. So we definitely need to make sure that these operating systems are patched. Again, um, IT teams or the vendors, they don't push out patch updates to make your life hell or inconvenient. They don't get any joy of trying to get these across to you, but it has this purpose, right? Like it could be a feature update or a security bug, or any issue with the application in itself or the operating system in itself, right? So that's where your patching operating system comes in. And before I move on, I do want to ask you, Danish, did you update your iPhone to iOS 18?
No, no, I haven't, and I'll tell you why. Because I'm still on iPhone 12, I think, and I'm worried that it might slow down my phone. So that's the reason I haven't. But I get it. I think I should
Yes,
take it
yes.
soon.
So I'll tell you one thing, right? So, and I get that part, right? That like, how is it going to impact my device, right? And it's going to slow. So that's a fair point. However, I don't know if you have ever noticed this, or you probably notice this. You have a large number of apps in your app store that are waiting to get updated. Now, some of them will get updated, some will not, and some will stop working until you actually put in iOS 18. And that's because the updates that have come through from the vendors or even from, let's say, Apple itself has a dependency on that iOS 18 as an operating system, right? So while you might update it, things might not function the way they expect it to, because it's kind of missing that link, right?
Right.
um, so that's where everything ties in. Like I said at the start of this segment, a lot of these things start tying in, whether it is around patching your applications, restricting your applications, patching your operating systems, right? So a lot of these things all start tying in. So maybe worthwhile for you to check how many apps in your that are showing up in your app store waiting to update, right? But definitely worthwhile. And I get your point about it being potentially being slower, but look, Apple is not your fly by night operator, right? Like uh, they have a rigorous process around testing stuff. Things can fail, as we have seen with those two vendors in the cybersecurity incident. Things can go wrong, um, but in most cases, it should be good, should be safe.
All right. So I think we're going to pause this fireside chat, and I'm going to go and update my phone right away.
Sounds good. Let's do that.
Of course, in the corporate world, we have it set up for all accounts, but these days, consumer applications like access to Google, Facebook also requires two-factor authentication or multi-factor. So maybe you want to cover the difference between 2FA, MFA, and is what is that all about?
Sure, absolutely. So yes, you're right. Look, I think for not only corporates, but like even at a personal level, we have been using MFA, like and whilst we may not have experienced this potentially on the personal side of things, but in corporate, the MFA fatigue is real, which also can cause concerns around like hey, what, I need to approve. And I think there was an incident, I can't recollect right now the exact details, and I wouldn't call it out very specific, but somebody did get an MFA prompt and they just kind of like not thinking through approved it, and that basically compromised a lot of things, right? Because essentially it is multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, being you use your username and password, and then you need that next layer of authentication to happen, right? So somebody's got hold of your username and password and need your token, MFA token, or whatever may be the case, your approval to proceed next. That can be challenging. So, like, I know very specifically, in at least in some very specific countries, OTP is a big thing, right? So, like, you have the username and password, and then you have OTP, and if somebody gets hold of your OTP, they already know your username and password, then they figure out ways to actually get an OTP off you, right? Which is a next level of social engineering, right? So that is definitely amazing. um so it does come down to how you manage that part of it, right? And it is important to have MFA, as we have also seen government is spending um significant amount of money to raise that awareness about MFA, because it does apply for more for financial transactions than anything else. Hence, the banks also would like you to leverage on MFA, right? But have you heard about passkeys at all?
I mean, I have heard about it, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. And it also makes me wonder how a passkey might be different from a password. So,
Correct, correct. So look, it is also a form of a multi-factor authentication, right? Which comes down to something you know, something you have, right, and something you are. And I would recommend everyone to start giving passkey a go. And just Google and see, like, most services that I use have passkey. Like, if you just start only with Google and Microsoft accounts, passkeys is amazing, because once you put in your username and password, it then basically show you an option to approve your passkey, right? Again, and it is very, in this scenario, it's device specific. So which means if you have passkey on your phone, it'll prompt you and then say, okay, do you approve? And does that multi-layer authentication, because for it to approve, it then also does, if you have Face ID set up, then it'll say, okay, this is approved. So it's not like somebody having your phone, does not know your phone password, or cannot authenticate using your face, gets a prompt, they won't be able to do anything with it, right? So that's a classic example to try it out, give it a go, because I think that is definitely amazing to start
all right.
using.
Thanks, Alpesh. I think I'll definitely look up what is exactly it's all about. Before we move on to the last topic, and this question applies to a lot of the topics that we've covered in the session 8. Does ASD tell you what tools to use to achieve MFA or OS hardening, or is there a preferred list of tools from a particular vendor, or these are just generic guidelines that you can use, that you can achieve using any tool of your choice?
Yeah, so a good question, right? So essentially, the aids are about doing certain things. So it's a framework and guidance, right? ASD would never tell you what tools or technology to use to achieve these, right? Because whilst, let's take my example, like, we don't have anything Android at home right now, ASD would not know that, so they cannot say, what, use this to backups. For example, it would be a moot case of that recommendation, because if the recommendation is something very specific to, this is how we can do through Android. Now, hang on, I don't have Android, so how would I be able to do that stuff? Now, that's at the personal level. Now, at corporate level, again, ASD would not dictate or even give guidance saying you should use these tools, because they're kind of then in that case endorsing or promoting that, hey, vendor X is better than vendor Y. So it's not about that, it's about these things are applicable irrespective of a vendor, tool, or technology. It's agnostic of everything else, and
Right.
you would need to do that. So, and we have seen this, right, so far in all the 7 scenarios. It does not. I have not talked about a very specific tool or technology. I have given examples about it because that's my personal experience, but that's not something that is relevant only for a vendor or a technology, but not relevant for the other, right? So MFA you can use whatever is the case, right? Like, whether it's a Google two-factor auth app, or Microsoft MFA app, or Authy from Twilio, you could use any of these, and there are many others as well. So it's ASD would not recommend a very specific vendor or tool/technology.
Understand. And I think that would apply to the next and the last topic that we have is regular backups. I'm guessing this is about saving your data somewhere, either in the cloud or on a hard disk.
Yes, yes. So this one is very interesting, and I'll tell you why, right? Um, and I think this is, we have seen some ads on TV about this, but I like to look at it a very different way. And I think this ads were very interesting. So in Australia, we do have natural calamities happen. So be it storm, floods, or bushfires, right? And it's very disheartening and loss of life, and properties that happen. I'll take a classic example over here, which actually resonates with what my dad used to always say. Is that you should have certain things very handy, right? So in that scenario, let's take the example of the floods or the bushfires, right? If you have a safety slash emergency kit ready that you can run with, what would you have in it, right? And I know I've seen some ads around, making sure you're ready for any kind of natural calamities, right? I'm not sure if you've seen those, but that's exactly what it is would you be ready for? So in my example, I would say I have my very specific academic um, documents in one folder. That same folder also has copies of my passport and few other things, right? So if I have to actually leave in an emergency my house or my home, then I can actually don't have to worry about it. I can literally run with those things. Right? Well, I can't save everything. There has to be something that I can save, right? So these are the things that would be very important. Um, the other thing is, I've learned this from actually my father-in-law, who says no matter how you have things in the cloud, the digital backup and everything, you should still have paper copies. Now I know I'll get shot down by people who are advocates for not printing and all that kind of stuff. Now he doesn't say, my father-in-law doesn't say you need to have reams of paper used to print stuff, but again for critical stuff, right? That you need to have that. If you could not access that in the cloud, would you be okay, right? So it could be a case of something very specific, right? That you need to have printed copies, which again I have, and I have that in that same backup folder. So I've taken what my father and my father-in-law have said, combined it, and I've kept it for my safety, right? Now in the organizational context, regular backups is critical, right? But what is important to understand is, whilst the backups are there, how many organizations are able to restore as part of the testing, right? And do disaster recovery test as well. That is very critical. I've been involved with few organizations where they actually spend time and money to put an effort to actually do that, and we have successfully done that even for cutover of the applications that are in the cloud.
Right.
Now we shouldn't have that myth that because if it's in the cloud, it's all safe and fine, right? Like, I'm not saying that it is not safe, but you still need to have certain things that you need to test it, and you need to have a backup of a backup. So in this scenario, we have done cutover for our clients, where everything is in the cloud. There's no on premises involved, but we have done cutover of a data center, right? So from primary to secondary, and then the application runs for a few days, and then at the end of that, on a weekend, we cut it back to the primary. So it tests a lot of things. It's not only about the data, it's also about the process that is important, that needs to be tested, right? Because when disaster strikes, what actually also matters is that governance that is potentially in place to make things happen, people being calm and working under pressure. So a lot of things start coming into that play, right? So backups is just not about okay, I ran good old days robocopy, backed up my data, and I'm good and safe, right? Yeah, personally, yes, to a certain extent, but again, at a personal level, you backed it up on your home storage device, not in the cloud, and then suddenly your home storage device is not available. What's going to happen? If it's case of a flood or fire and it's destroyed, and you didn't back it up to the cloud, that's the case of where I'm saying it's good idea to have multiple backups and multiple ways of doing things, right?
So with this, we've come to the end of the chat. But before we conclude, I would like to share that Essential 8 is an important topic for all Australians as well as educate. And we are going to launch a series of trainings for different levels of audiences. So our first training is going live on October 28th. It's called Essential 8 Fundamentals, but that's not going to be it. We will be launching Essential 8 for parents and kids and Essential 8 intermediate and advanced courses as well. There is going to be a pathway that you could take for Essential 8 to, go from a beginner to an intermediate to an advanced level. But more importantly, for those of you who've stayed until now, the links for these trainings are available. And more importantly, you could see the promo codes that you could apply to get a decent level of discount on not only the individual trainings, but even if you wanted to go for the full pathway bundle. So we hope to see some of you on these trainings, especially the one that's starting on October 28th. And I'll hand it over to Alpesh for any last words before we end this call.
Absolutely. Thank you, Danish. Look, all I want everyone to remember is that cybersecurity is an ongoing process. It's not only about the organizations; it is also personal. As you may have seen on some of our fireside content material, right? Like cybersecurity is personal. Essentially, is also personal, right? Uh, Essentially, it is a framework to get started. It's not the end of it all, but it's a good thing to get started and keep doing that stuff. Be conscious about it, because I think security is also about being conscious, right? Again, not only limited to our work, but also at a personal level. And I did want to close off with an example. A couple of months back, I was selling my car on Facebook Marketplace. I got few offers. I got one offer which did not negotiate in the price. The person actually said, "I'll give you what you want. All I need from you is a very specific check to make sure the car is not written off, doesn't have any liabilities, etc., etc." And I was like, okay, yeah, that's fine, because that's a standard process. It's basically called PPSR. Not, don't ask me what the full form of that is right now. But the point being, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fair enough, right? So I said, okay, I'll give it to you. So I went to the government approved website and I did that and I gave it to him. He came back saying, no, this is not the entire report. I need more. I was like, I was scratching my head thinking, okay, fine. Maybe I don't know something that he knows, because he said he's a dealer. So I said, okay, I'll give him the benefit of doubt. I said, okay, tell me what you want. Share me the details. Share and I'll do it. Uh, his response was, Google for these things and you'll come across it. I Googled for it. I could not find the link what he was actually wanting me to go to. Right now, this started getting pretty frustrating for me, because like, why would I have to go to the hoops? I'll cut this short. Essentially, he sent me a link for me to download a report from. Right, and I was like, okay. So I clicked on it. I went, um, and it did not look right to me. It was from outside. It did not even have a .com domain. It looked very very suspicious, right? Because so I figured this out that, hey, hang on, this guy is going to take my money, right? I'm not going to get a report, and he's going to make money. It was about $45. So it's not about the actual amount, but it was about the way this thing was getting scammed, which put red flags in my head, because the conversation went on for a long time. Like, he was getting frustrated. I was not doing what he wanted me to do. That's a classic case when when you get into a conversation on a phone or something, figure out a way. If that person is genuine, they will not get frustrated. But if they are not, they will start getting frustrated, right? Like, I thankfully I don't get any scam calls. Um, but if you do get calls and they ask for specific details, try throwing them off the tracks and start asking them questions, right? I did read a very interesting post on Friday, and it was hilarious how the author of that post frustrated the call that she got from some of these scammers, right? Just one incident where she does that. I'll try and find that and I'll put that in the chat. But my point is, make it personal, be safe, and apply some of these things. And I look forward to seeing you all join us on the different pathways for Essential 8. It is going to be very interesting, very important as well, and we'll make it fun, right? So it won't be dry as bone. It definitely be very interesting, because some of the things that we are aiming to do in Educate is not only about uh, training or being learning to be certified, etc. It is actually application of what you're going to be learning and doing that, whether it is at personal level or at the organization or growing in your work area. And that is why, like, some of the things that we are certainly going to be doing with Educate is in collaboration with our other venture, Verify 8, have the integrated workforce learning. So things that you will learn at Educate, you will have the opportunity to be able to do those things at Verified, and as part of our consulting and service integration capabilities is to practically apply what you have learned. So you will learn practical stuff at Educate, which you will be able to apply at Verified as and when the opportunities arise with our clients. Of course, it's subject to our clients giving the go ahead, but we certainly want to work towards that. Having said that, I will hand over back to Danish. Thank you very much for your time on this.
Thank you, Alpesh, and thanks everyone for joining. And we hope to see you on some of our training.